Dad uninvited me from the family cruise to hide me from his new in-laws. Then they boarded my $20 million flagship vessel. I am Liam, 35 years old, and 20 agonizing years of desperately trying to buy my own family's love, acceptance, and basic human respect ended the day I stood on a crowded dock and watched my stepmother tear up my boarding pass. I stood right there on the pristine, hand-polished teakwood deck of the Charleston Harbor Marina, holding a meticulously wrapped vintage maritime compass. I had spent 6 grueling months tracking down that specific hand-polished brass compass through private antique dealers in Europe for my father's 60th birthday. The mid-afternoon sun was beating down heavily on the busy docks, making the choppy water sparkle like a million crushed diamonds, but I felt absolutely freezing from the inside out. My stepmother, Eleanor, looked down her nose at me with a gaze so incredibly cold it could have frozen the entire harbor. Her designer linen suit was perfectly pressed without a single visible wrinkle. Her platinum and diamond jewelry caught the bright afternoon light, flashing aggressively in my eyes like a warning siren. Her expression was one of pure, unadulterated disgust. She took a deliberate, calculated step forward, aggressively invading my personal space, and said the words that finally, permanently broke the 20-year spell of blind submission I had been living under. Liam, please do not make this awkward in front of Julian's new in-laws. This luxury cruise is for successful family members only. I absolutely cannot have you dragging down our pristine image with your pathetic, blue-collar demeanor. Go back to your little boat cleaning job before you embarrass us any further. She actually laughed. She let out a sharp, mocking, highly theatrical laugh right in front of my father, who stood completely silent, staring at his expensive leather shoes. She laughed right in front of my golden child stepbrother, Julian, who smirked at me with pure, unfiltered arrogance. And she laughed right in front of a dozen other wealthy patrons who were waiting to board their own private vessels. She wanted to humiliate me. She wanted to firmly remind me of my place in the dirt beneath the soles of her expensive imported heels. But there was one massive, life-altering reality she was completely blind to. The multi-million-dollar luxury superyacht she was standing in front of, the magnificent vessel she had been loudly bragging about chartering to impress a billionaire family, belonged to me. I owned it. Every single fiberglass inch, every twin-turbo diesel engine, every piece of imported Italian marble, and every crystal chandelier inside that magnificent vessel belonged to my corporation. And right at that exact moment, as she was laughing at my expense, my corporate legal team was sitting in a corner office in downtown Atlanta, drafting the exact financial paperwork that would completely dismantle her perfect little world. Now, grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and let us go back to where this 20-year nightmare actually started. You see, the heavy smell of salt water, drying kelp, and thick diesel fuel has always been my true sanctuary. It was the only constant, reliable thing in a life that started with profound, echoing abandonment. My real mother walked out the front door when I was barely 3 years old. There was no dramatic goodbye in the pouring rain. There was no bitter custody battle fought in a crowded courtroom with high-priced lawyers fighting over visitation rights. There were no messy divorce proceedings to divide up assets or negotiate alimony payments. She just packed a single faded leather suitcase while I was taking a nap on a random Tuesday afternoon and vanished into thin air, never to be seen again. She left my dad, Thomas, to raise me entirely on a marina maintenance manager's meager, unpredictable salary. We lived in a cramped, drafty 2-bedroom apartment near the commercial docks. The cheap paint on the walls was constantly peeling from the corrosive, salty sea air. The heavy iron heating pipes clanked aggressively all winter long, keeping us awake at night. You could hear the heavy, mournful foghorns blasting through the single-pane windows every morning before the sun even came up. It was not exactly prime real estate. We did not have a sprawling backyard or a fancy modern kitchen, but to me, it was a castle because it was ours. My dad was my absolute hero back in those days. He was a mountain of a man who smelled perpetually of heavy engine oil, cheap diner coffee, and classic Old Spice. He had rough, calloused hands like coarse sandpaper from spending 10 grueling hours a day, working on massive boat engines, tearing down flooded carburetors, and replacing rusted propellers in the freezing, murky water. I grew up running barefoot along those splintered wooden docks, learning how to tie a perfect bowline knot in a clove hitch before I was even old enough to tie my own shoelaces. While other kids my age were crying about their weekly allowances, begging their parents for new video games, or spending their summers at expensive sleepaway camps, I was out in the blazing, unforgiving summer sun. I was helping my dad scrape stubborn, razor-sharp barnacles off the hulls of commercial fishing boats just to save up a few extra dollars for my future college fund. We were an inseparable team. We did not have much money in the bank. We did not have fancy clothes or new cars, but we had deep mutual respect. We had raw honesty, and we had each other. That entire safe, secure world died the summer I turned 14. My dad was working a weekend maintenance job at an exclusive, high-end yacht club fundraiser. He was just there in his gray, grease-stained work uniform to make sure the backup generators did not fail during the extravagant gala. That was where he met Eleanor. She was old money, or at least she played the part flawlessly to anyone who did not look too closely at her heavily leveraged financial records. She swooped into his life with her perfectly manicured nails, her intoxicating, outrageously expensive perfume, and her practiced, predatory country club smile. She saw a hard-working, lonely, vulnerable man who was desperate for companionship, and she sunk her manicured claws in deep. Within 6 short months, my dad was a completely different person. He stopped wearing his comfortable old flannel shirts. He stopped taking me down to the docks to fish on early Sunday mornings. He stopped talking to his old, loyal friends from the marina. They got married in a lavish, over-the-top ceremony that felt a lot more like a cold, calculated corporate merger than a genuine celebration of two people falling in love. We packed up our humble little apartment, threw most of our old, cherished memories into cheap cardboard boxes, and moved into her sprawling, gated waterfront mansion in the wealthiest zip code in the state. I was an optimistic kid. I genuinely, foolishly thought I was getting a real family. I thought I was finally getting a mother figure to fill the massive, echoing void left in my life. Instead, I got a front row seat to my own permanent replacement. Eleanor did not just come with a massive bank account and a snobby, elitist attitude. She came with a son. Julian was exactly my age, but he was light years ahead of me in arrogance, pure entitlement, and casual, practiced cruelty. The very moment I walked through those heavy custom oak front doors, carrying my meager belongings in 2 faded canvas duffel bags, Eleanor made the unspoken rules of her house very clear without ever having to spell them out. I will never, ever forget our first Thanksgiving dinner in that massive, intimidating house. I was so desperate to fit in and be accepted by these wealthy people. I had spent 4 solid hours in the kitchen helping the hired catering staff set up the heavy silver serving trays, polishing the expensive silverware until my fingers cramped, and organizing the massive dining room, just trying to make myself useful and prove my worth to my new stepfamily. Aunt Agatha, Eleanor's older sister and a woman whose veins seemed to pump pure, unadulterated venom, sat directly across from me at the massive mahogany dining table. Halfway through the elaborate meal, while everyone was passing the expensive imported wine and laughing loudly, she leaned over her crystal glass. She looked right at me with a visible, ugly sneer, curling her lip in absolute disgust. Then she loudly, clearly asked Eleanor if Thomas was expecting them to tap into Julian's future trust fund inheritance to pay for my cheap, dead-end public school education. The entire table went dead silent. The gentle, polite clinking of expensive silverware stopped completely. The heavy silence was suffocating. I looked down the long, polished table at my dad. He was sitting right there at the head of the table in a stiff, incredibly uncomfortable custom suit Eleanor had bought him. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for him to slam his heavy fist down on the polished wood, to raise his voice, to say that I was his blood, his son, and that I belonged there just as much as anyone else in that room. I waited for him to be the hero I always thought he was. He did not say a single word. He did not even look me in the eye to offer a silent, cowardly apology. He just stared blankly at his plate of roasted turkey and took a slow, trembling sip of ice water. That was the exact, heartbreaking moment I realized the strong, proud man who raised me was gone forever. He had been completely hollowed out, replaced by a terrified ghost who lived in absolute, paralyzing fear of upsetting his wealthy new wife and losing his comfortable, effortless new lifestyle. From that Thanksgiving onward, the toxic dynamic was permanently set in stone. I was the unwanted guest, the lingering, embarrassing reminder of my father's working-class past, while Julian was the golden child destined for absolute greatness. I retreated deep into myself, spending more and more time down at the commercial docks, surrounded by the familiar, comforting smell of diesel and salt. I began actively preparing myself for a cold, hard life where the only person I could ever truly rely on was myself. And I promised myself, sitting on those splintered wooden docks watching the tide roll in, that I would never, ever let anyone make me feel that impossibly small again. Living in that massive waterfront mansion was exactly like trying to navigate a live, active minefield while completely blindfolded. Eleanor had this terrifyingly effective way of cutting you down to the absolute bone without ever raising her voice above a polite, conversational volume. It was always subtle, highly calculated microaggressions designed to constantly remind me that I was an outsider, a pathetic charity case living entirely on her generous dime. When it was time for the annual family holiday photos to be sent out to their wealthy friends and corporate business partners, I was always deliberately placed in the very back row. I was specifically positioned so that a heavy shadow would fall over my face, or shoved slightly out of focus, while Julian stood front and center in a custom designer tuxedo. When her wealthy relatives came over for lavish, catered dinner parties and politely asked about our academic progress, Eleanor would talk for 20 solid minutes about Julian's completely mediocre, average achievements. She would praise him to the high heavens for getting a C+ in basic biology as if he had just miraculously cured a major global disease. She would talk endlessly about his bright future, his undeniable natural talent, his amazing personality, and she would completely, utterly ignore my Strata report card sitting right there on the kitchen counter next to the expensive artisan cheese platter. Julian absorbed his mother's toxicity like a greedy, dry sponge soaking up dirty water. We were high school seniors when the true, unbridgeable divide between us became a solid, impenetrable concrete wall. For his 16th birthday, Eleanor threw a massive, fully catered party by the infinity pool, inviting every wealthy kid in the entire county. She blindfolded him, led him out to the circular cobblestone driveway, and dramatically pulled off the silk scarf. Sitting right there, gleaming under the bright afternoon sun, was a brand new, cherry red Aston Martin. It was a beautiful, terrifying machine built for extreme speed and luxury, an incredibly dangerous toy for an arrogant, careless teenager who had never worked a single hard day in his entire life. Julian did not even say thank you to his mother. He did not hug her. He just snatched the heavy keys from her hand, inspected the pristine interior, and loudly complained to all his wealthy friends that the custom leather seats were not the exact shade of midnight black he had explicitly asked for. He said it was embarrassing. Eleanor just laughed nervously and promised to have the dealership completely change the expensive leather the very next day. My 16th birthday passed exactly 3 months later. There was no catered party by the pool. There were no friends invited over. There was no driveway surprise waiting for me. Then, I walked into the massive, sterile gourmet kitchen that morning before school, and found a cheap, generic greeting card sitting alone on the cold marble island. Inside was a crisp $50 bill and a meticulously typed chore list from Eleanor. The list politely reminded me that I needed to personally pressure wash the entire massive pool deck, clean out the second-story gutters entirely by hand, and sweep the private tennis courts before her prestigious HOA meeting that evening. I did not let it break my spirit. I took that $50 bill, folded it neatly into my pocket, and I used the deep, burning resentment in my chest as raw, high-octane fuel. While Julian was out recklessly wrecking his expensive cars, getting arrested for underage drinking, and burning through his massive college fund on wild, drug-fueled weekend benders in Miami, I was down at the marina working 60-hour weeks. I saved every single penny I earned. I skipped the high school parties. I skipped the spring break trips. I skipped buying new clothes and wore the exact same faded jeans for 3 years straight. I poured everything I had into a dilapidated, half-sunken speedboat I managed to buy at a local police auction for absolute pennies on the dollar. I spent an entire year rebuilding that rusted engine completely by hand, using the old, greasy tools my dad had abandoned in the garage. My hands were permanently stained with dark grease. My back ached constantly from bending over the fiberglass hull. But that single, ugly, loud boat was the absolute foundation of what would eventually become Bennett Coastal Charters. I worked myself to the absolute bone through 4 grueling years of college. I studied business management, corporate finance, and high-end hospitality by day, sitting in massive lecture halls in cheap clothes. And I ran late-night fishing and party charters out on the water by the time the sun went down. It was a brutal, exhausting existence that tested every ounce of my physical and mental sanity. There were countless nights I slept on the damp, freezing fiberglass floor of my boat using a rolled-up towel as a pillow because I was simply too exhausted to drive my beat-up truck back to my rented studio apartment. But the sweat, the intense isolation, and the tears paid off beyond my wildest dreams. By the time I hit 30, I had turned that one salvaged, ugly boat into a highly profitable fleet of 5 luxury vessels. I understood the business from the dirty bilge pumps all the way up to the corporate boardroom. I diversified my income, maxed out my 401k, and started heavily investing in waterfront commercial real estate. By 35, my company owned 15 top-tier luxury yachts, employing a dedicated, highly trained staff of over 200 people. My absolute crown jewel was the Sapphire Horizon, a breathtaking 150-foot superyacht that featured imported Italian marble floors, a private jacuzzi, a gourmet chef's kitchen, and a custom helipad. It was currently the most sought-after charter on the entire East Coast, catering exclusively to celebrities, politicians, and high-powered CEOs. I was a completely self-made multimillionaire. I had a booming business, a dedicated staff, and a rapidly growing real estate portfolio that generated massive passive income. But in my family's eyes, I was still the dirty, grease-stained kid holding a mop. Eleanor flat out refused to acknowledge my success. She would aggressively change the subject whenever anyone brought up my company. To them, my multi-million-dollar corporation was just a cute little boat rental kiosk on the public beach. Despite the constant emotional abuse, the blatant disrespect, and the complete lack of support, I never officially cut them off. Deep down in my core, despite all my financial success and total independence, I still desperately, pathetically craved my father's approval. Every single year, Eleanor organized a massive, week-long family cruise to celebrate their supposed wealth and showcase their high status to their friends. And every single year, I dutifully showed up, playing the role of the good, quiet, obedient son. I would secretly call whatever high-end charter company they used, pay thousands of dollars out of my own pocket to secretly upgrade their food and beverage packages, secure them better VIP cabins, and arrange private shore excursions. I let Eleanor take all the credit for the incredible service. I did it because I kept hoping, praying, that one day my dad would look at me, truly look at me, and finally see the successful, powerful man I had become rather than the heavy burden he thought I was. This year was supposed to be completely different. I had just acquired the Sapphire Horizon, bringing it into my fleet, and I spent weeks meticulously picking out the perfect, highly personalized gifts for the upcoming family trip. I bought my dad that rare vintage compass used by World War II naval captains, a beautiful piece of history I knew he would appreciate. I bought Eleanor an incredibly rare platinum and diamond tennis bracelet, hoping against all hope to finally buy an ounce of her respect. I bought Julian a high-end, waterproof 4K drone for his amateur photography hobby. I was sitting in my spacious corner office overlooking the bustling harbor, carefully wrapping the presents in expensive silver paper, feeling a rare, genuine sense of optimism about my family. Then my cell phone rang, shattering the quiet of my office. The caller ID flashed my dad's name. "Hey Dad, I am just getting everything packed and ready for next week," I said cheerfully, leaning back in my plush leather executive chair, looking at the beautifully wrapped gifts on my desk. There was a heavy, suffocating, agonizing silence on the other end of the line. All I could hear was his shallow, nervous breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight, mechanical, and clearly rehearsed. "Liam, about the trip next week. There has been a slight change of plans." My stomach instantly dropped out of my body. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. "What kind of change, Dad?" "Eleanor feels. Well, she thinks it might be best to keep things a bit more intimate this year. Space considerations and all that on the yacht. You know how cramped these vessels can get, even the nice ones. We are just going to keep it strictly to immediate family this time around." I gripped the thick edge of my mahogany desk so hard my knuckles turned pure white. "Immediate family? Dad, I am your flesh and blood, I am your son. I have gone on this family trip every single year for 2 decades. What do you mean immediate family? Please do not make this difficult, Liam," he whispered into the phone, sounding exactly like a beaten, terrified dog begging for mercy. "Julian is bringing his new fiancée, Vivian, along for the very first time. Her family is very well connected in Atlanta. Eleanor just wants everything to be absolutely perfect for them. We will make it up to you, I promise. Maybe we can grab a coffee next month, just the 2 of us." He hung up the phone before I could even process the words to fight back. The line went dead. I sat there in my silent, empty office, surrounded by thousands of dollars in beautifully wrapped gifts for people who did not even consider me to be a part of their family. I did not cry. I did not throw my phone against the wall. A cold, absolute, terrifying clarity washed over my entire body. I finally understood exactly where I stood. I did not have to sit around and wonder why I was suddenly considered a massive liability to the family image. I immediately picked up my desk phone and called Chloe, my vice president and my most loyal best friend since our grueling, sleep-deprived college days. Chloe is an absolute force of nature. She is the kind of woman who does not sugarcoat a single thing, has a mind like a steel trap, and possesses a network of corporate contacts that could rival a high-level private investigator. "Give me exactly 20 minutes, Chloe said, her voice sharp and intensely focused. The moment I quickly explained my father's pathetic, cowardly phone call, she didn't offer empty sympathies. She went straight to work. She called me back in exactly 15 minutes. "Liam, I need you to sit down, take a deep breath, and prepare yourself for this. Just tell me the truth, Chloe, I can handle whatever it is." "It is Julian." She sighed heavily, her voice dripping with absolute disgust and contempt. "His new fiancée, Vivian." I ran a deep background check. Her full name is Vivian Sterling, as in the only daughter of Harrison Sterling, the billionaire CEO of Sterling Global Logistics. Julian has been aggressively playing the part of a wealthy trust fund heir to impress them for the past 6 months. He has been driving that Aston Martin around, acting like he owns the city. He even told them he owns multiple high-end real estate properties. But that is not even the worst part of it. "Hit me," I said. My jaw clenched so tight my teeth physically ached. Julian told the Sterling family that he comes from a long, prestigious line of maritime royalty. He completely fabricated his entire background to perfectly match theirs. He claimed Eleanor's family built a massive shipping empire in the 70s. And when Vivian innocently asked about his stepbrother, Julian told her, "You were a deeply troubled, estranged relative with a severe gambling problem who cleans boat toilets at a public marina for minimum wage." Eleanor enthusiastically backed up the entire lie to the Sterlings during a dinner party last week. "They uninvited you because they are absolutely terrified you are going to show up to the luxury cruise, open your mouth, and expose the fact that Julian is an unemployed, lazy fraud who is still living off his mother's heavily leveraged credit cards at 35 years old. The betrayal was so profound, so deeply malicious and calculated, it physically knocked the breath completely out of my lungs. This was not just about missing a luxury vacation. They were actively, intentionally erasing my entire existence to serve their false narrative. They were invalidating a lifetime of backbreaking hard work, sleepless nights, and incredible corporate success just to desperately protect Julian's fragile, pathetic ego, and his gold-digging lies to a billionaire family. And my father knew about all of it. My father stood by and allowed his own flesh and blood to be painted as a miserable, pathetic failure to absolute strangers, just so he would not have to endure an argument with his domineering wife. He traded my dignity for his own peace and quiet in that mansion. He chose his comfortable life over his son, just like my mother did all those years ago. Are you really going to sit there and let them get away with this? Chloe asked softly over the speakerphone, breaking the heavy silence. Liam, look around your office. Look at what you have built from absolutely nothing. You have built an absolute empire. You employ hundreds of people. You negotiate million-dollar contracts before breakfast. You do not have to take this abuse from them anymore. You have the power to destroy this lie. I am not going to do anything impulsive, I replied, staring at the vintage maritime compass resting on my desk, the gift intended for a father I no longer recognized. I am going to let them hang themselves with their own incredibly expensive rope. Update 1. I spent the entire weekend processing the massive, overwhelming grief of losing a father who was technically still alive and breathing. It genuinely felt worse than attending a funeral. Because at a funeral, you are mourning someone who actually loved you, someone whose journey simply came to an end. Here, I was actively mourning the pathetic illusion of a parent who actively chose a life of comfort and cowardice over his own kid. It was a deliberate choice to abandon me. Monday morning, I walked into my corporate office with a completely new mentality. The sad, rejected boy seeking his father's approval was dead. I was a ruthless, calculating businessman who protected his assets and his peace. And nobody, absolutely nobody, messes with my business or my peace of mind. I was sitting at my large mahogany desk, reviewing the quarterly financial reports regarding our new real estate acquisitions and sipping a black coffee when Sophie, my executive assistant, knocked tentatively on my heavy glass door. She looked pale and slightly panicked, holding a thick stack of papers against her chest. Mr. Bennett, I am so sorry to interrupt your morning review, but I was just going over the VIP passenger manifests for the charter routes next week. You really need to see this specific booking for the Sapphire Horizon. She walked in and handed me a thick yellow manila folder. I opened it up and my eyes quickly scanned the corporate booking details. The charter was secured under a heavily shielded shell company, Sterling Global Logistics LLC. It was paid in full utilizing our premium platinum package, a staggering $85,000 for the week, and the client requested the absolute utmost discretion and top-tier security personnel. I flipped over to the passenger manifest page. Thomas Bennett, Eleanor Bennett, Julian Bennett, Vivian Sterling, Harrison Sterling, V. 40. 5. 5. Harrison Sterling. 5. I burst out laughing. It was a dark, humorless, hollow sound that echoed off the glass walls of my office, visibly startling Sophie. They had booked a luxury charter through an elite third-party concierge service to impress the billionaire-in-laws. They demanded the absolute best, most expensive, most prestigious vessel on the eastern seaboard to keep up their pathetic charade of generational wealth. And they had blindly, arrogantly walked right through the front door of my company without doing a shred of due diligence. They were paying me $85,000 a week to host the exact same family vacation they had just banished me from. They were renting my property to pretend they were better than me. Should I immediately contact the legal department and cancel the contract, sir? Sophie asked nervously, shifting her weight from foot to foot. We have a standard termination clause that allows us to cancel any booking for any reason with a full refund. I can draft the email right now and have legal review it. Cancel it? I smiled, sliding the folder back across the smooth wood of my desk. Sophie, why on earth would we cancel our most important, high-profile clients of the entire year? No, we are not canceling a single thing. We are going to give them a family experience they will never, ever forget. We are going to roll out the red carpet. The plan formed in my mind with lethal, terrifying precision. I was not going to storm down to their gated mansion, kick the custom oak door in, and throw a screaming emotional tantrum in their foyer. I was not going to file a petty lawsuit for emotional distress or send an angry, unhinged email to Harrison Sterling exposing the truth about Julian's lies. That was amateur hour. That was how desperate, powerless people acted. I was going to serve them their massive reality check on a heavy silver platter surrounded by the deep, inescapable open ocean where they could not run away, call an Uber, or hide behind their gated community walls. The Sapphire Horizon needed a highly qualified captain for that specific week. Our regular senior captain had requested time off months ago. To cover the sudden schedule gap, our HR department had temporarily contracted a freelance guy named Captain Vance to cover the route. Vance was a 20-year veteran in the maritime industry, but he had a quiet, persistent reputation for being overly ambitious, slightly greedy, and utterly lacking in basic moral fiber. I called Chloe back into my office and locked the heavy glass door, engaging the electronic privacy blinds so nobody could see inside. We sat down and dug deep into the logistics, the high-end provisioning, and the crew assignments for the trip. We needed everything to be flawless. But, as we were systematically reviewing the internal server communication logs between Captain Vance and the concierge service to ensure dietary restrictions were met, Chloe's sharp eyes flagged a serious anomaly. "Liam, look closely at these email server timestamps," she said, pointing a manicured finger at my glowing monitor. Vance is secretly BCCing an external, heavily encrypted email address on all the itinerary details, the route maps, and the highly sensitive mechanical maintenance logs of the Sapphire Horizon. I cracked my knuckles and immediately traced the IP address of the external email through our advanced cybersecurity software. It took 10 agonizing minutes to break the complex routing, bouncing through multiple fake servers. The address ultimately belonged to a server registered to Mercer Yachting. Mercer was my biggest, most aggressive corporate rival. He was a sleazy businessman who had been actively trying to bankrupt my company with dirty tactics, poaching my staff, and undercutting my prices for 3 miserable years. I dug much deeper into our server logs, recovering deleted cache files, and bypassing Vance's ridiculously weak passwords. What we found in those hidden folders made my blood run absolutely cold. We uncovered a string of hidden encrypted messages. Eleanor had secretly contacted Mercer weeks ago under a fake name. She wanted him to dig up massive dirt on my company. She wanted to explicitly prove to Harrison Sterling that whatever luxury service he booked was somehow vastly inferior to her own exacting high society standards, allowing her to play the sophisticated hero who demanded massive refunds and saved the day for the billionaire family. Mercer, realizing he had a golden, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to permanently ruin my Flagship yacht's pristine reputation, had paid off Captain Vance under the table. The plan was sickeningly simple and deeply malicious. Vance was going to intentionally sabotage the central air conditioning units and the main gyroscopic stabilizer during the roughest part of the trip in open water. If you don't know boats, a gyroscopic stabilizer uses massive spinning flywheels to counteract the pitch and roll of the ocean. Disabling it on a yacht that size in choppy water will make the vessel roll violently from side to side, creating a horrific pendulum effect. They wanted the Sterling family to have a miserable, sweating, nauseating experience. Mercer would then leak the mechanical failure to the maritime press, claiming my fleet was unsafe to utterly destroy my corporate stock value and force my company into a massive lawsuit and inevitable bankruptcy. My own stepmother was so completely blinded by her irrational hatred and her desperate need to look superior that she was completely willing to risk the safety, comfort, and physical well-being of her own family and her son's future in-laws. She was inadvertently teaming up with my worst corporate enemy to destroy my life's work, my entire livelihood, just to stroke her own fragile ego. "Fire Vance right this second," Chloe demanded, her eyes blazing with intense protective fury, slamming her hand on my desk. "Call the harbor police. Let's get our corporate lawyers to file a massive lawsuit against Mercer for corporate espionage. This is textbook industrial sabotage. We have him dead to rights." "No," I said, my voice eerily, unnervingly calm in the quiet office. "If we fire Vance right now, Mercer immediately covers his tracks. Eleanor plays the innocent, ignorant victim who knows absolutely nothing about it. She will just say she was asking for a competitive quote. We let the trap stay wide open. We just change the bait." I made a few highly discreet phone calls to my contacts at the Maritime Board. I legally suspended Vance's master maritime credentials pending a quiet internal audit for a routine paperwork discrepancy regarding his annual physical exam, effectively grounding him on land indefinitely without tipping off Mercer or Eleanor to the real reason he was suddenly unavailable. "So, who is going to captain the Sapphire Horizon with a billionaire shipping magnate on board?" Chloe asked, crossing her arms and raising an eyebrow. "We don't have anyone else cleared for a vessel that size on such short notice." I looked at my reflection in the dark-tinted glass of my office window. I had not worn a captain's uniform in 5 long years since I moved permanently into the executive suite to run the massive corporation, but I still held a flawless, active master captain's license. I still knew the treacherous coastal waters better than anyone. I built this company with my bare hands. I said softly. I spent the next 4 days meticulously preparing the vessel for absolute war. I met with Luca, my trusted head chef, who had been with me since the early days of serving cheap sandwiches on a rusted boat, and briefed him on the exact, highly customized Mediterranean menu I wanted. I gathered my elite crew, 6 incredibly loyal employees who I trusted with my life and my business. I explained the toxic family dynamic. I explained the vicious sabotage plot orchestrated by Mercer and my stepmother. I demanded their absolute unwavering discretion. I was to be addressed strictly as Captain Liam until I explicitly gave the signal to drop the act. I drove into town and went to a high-end, old-school barber. I had him cut my hair high and tight, a severe military style that completely changed my usual relaxed, swept-back executive look. I ordered a custom-tailored set of crisp, brilliant white captain's epaulettes and a pair of dark, polarized aviator sunglasses that shielded the entire upper half of my face. People only see what they expect to see. Eleanor and Julian fully expected a nameless, faceless servant, a disposable background character to their grand, pathetic play. They would never look closely enough at the help to recognize the family member they had thrown away like absolute garbage. Update 2. The morning of the departure finally arrived. A heavy, thick coastal fog hugged the docks of the Charleston harbor, perfectly matching the cold, unyielding steel in my chest. I stood up on the elevated bridge of the sapphire horizon, my hands resting lightly on the polished mahogany helm. Below me, cutting through the mist, I heard the heavy thud of luxury SUV doors slamming shut on the concrete pier. I watched through the high-definition security cameras as Eleanor, Julian, my father, and the Sterlings approached the boarding ramp. The storm was finally here, and I was standing right in the eye of it, holding absolutely all of the power. I took a deep breath, adjusted my sunglasses, and prepared to welcome my family aboard my yacht. The sun broke through the gray mist, catching the polished chrome railings and the tinted glass of the upper decks. My crew was lined up flawlessly at the base of the gangway, wearing their crisp white uniforms with my corporate logo stitched meticulously in gold thread. Luca, my head chef, was standing by with a heavy silver tray of chilled champagne flutes. Everything was perfectly orchestrated down to the exact second. Through the cameras, I watched Eleanor step out of a black luxury SUV. She was wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and oversized designer sunglasses, completely oblivious to the reality of her impending situation. She walked with that practiced arrogant strut, her chin held high as if she had personally built the marina with her bare hands and owned the very ocean we were floating on. My father, Thomas, trailed closely behind her, carrying her heavy leather overnight bags like an unpaid, exhausted bellhop. He looked incredibly worn down. He looked like a man who had completely surrendered his dignity for a quiet life, completely forgetting the strong, capable maintenance manager who used to teach me how to tie complex nautical knots on these very same wooden docks. Then came Julian, stepping out of the vehicle and immediately adjusting the collar of his expensive polo shirt. He reached back and offered his hand to Vivian Sterling. Vivian was undeniably beautiful, but more importantly, she looked genuinely kind and completely out of place next to him. She did not have the harsh, judgmental angles that Eleanor and Julian carried in their posture. Following them was Harrison Sterling himself. The billionaire CEO of Sterling Global Logistics stepped out of the luxury vehicle and immediately looked up at the massive profile of the sapphire horizon. I could tell by the precise way his eyes scanned the radar arch, the communication antennas, and the deep V hull design that he knew exactly what he was looking at. He was a man who intimately understood maritime excellence, and he was clearly impressed by the engineering. I hit the intercom button on the bridge console, connecting directly to my first mate, a loyal guy named Diego, who knew exactly who I was and exactly what was happening today. Diego had been with me since my company consisted of 2 leaky boats and a folding table. Diego, I said smoothly into the microphone, the guests are approaching the ramp. Execute the standard VIP boarding protocol. Remember our briefing. I am just Captain Liam today. Let them do all the talking. Do not break character for a single second. Copy that, Captain, Diego replied, a slight hint of a knowing smile evident in his voice. I watched through the thick glass of the bridge as Eleanor reached the base of the ramp. She did not even look Diego in the eye when he formally welcomed her aboard. She simply snatched a crystal glass of champagne from Luca's silver tray and turned immediately to Harrison Sterling, projecting her voice so that everyone on the public dock could hear her brag. Harrison, darling, welcome to the Sapphire Horizon, Eleanor announced, gesturing grandly to the massive vessel as if she held the original deed to it in her designer purse. I had my personal concierge spend weeks securing this specific yacht. It is incredibly challenging to find truly superior vessels on the East Coast these days. Most of these charter companies cut corners, hire cheap labor, and use subpar materials. But I have a very exacting eye for quality and high-end real estate on the water. I simply refuse to settle for anything less than absolute perfection for our family gatherings. Harrison Sterling took a glass of champagne and politely nodded, observing the immaculate teak decking under his expensive shoes. It is a truly magnificent vessel, Eleanor. The craftsmanship is remarkable. It is very tasteful, not ostentatious like so many luxury yachts you see down in Miami. I am very much looking forward to meeting the captain. A ship of this immense size and technical capability requires a true master at the helm. Julian nervously adjusted his heavy gold watch and chimed in, desperate to sound knowledgeable and maintain his fabricated persona. Absolutely, Harrison. We have been a dedicated yachting family for generations. As you well know, I practically grew up on the open water. I told the booking agency we needed a twin-engine setup with a deep V hull for maximum stability. I simply would not subject Vivian to a rough or uncomfortable ride. I personally vetted the specifications. I actually had to cover my mouth with my hand to stop myself from laughing out loud on the bridge. Julian did not know the difference between a deep V hull and a standard bathtub. He was just aggressively repeating maritime buzzwords he had quickly searched on his phone during the car ride over. He was a total fraud, standing on a vessel paid for by my salary, trying to impress a man whose company moved billions of dollars in global freight. Diego led them up the gangway and began giving them the grand tour of the main deck. I watched the security monitors as they walked slowly through the main salon. Eleanor lowered to obscure my brow line, and made my way down the spiral glass staircase to the main deck. I kept my posture rigidly straight and my face completely devoid of any recognizable emotion. I was no longer the wounded son, I was the master of the vessel. I stepped firmly into the salon. The room went entirely quiet. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," I said, using a slightly deeper, more clipped, and highly authoritative voice than my natural everyday speaking tone. "I am Captain Liam. On behalf of Bennett Coastal Charters, I want to personally welcome you aboard the Sapphire Horizon. Your safety and your absolute comfort are my highest priorities today." I scanned the luxurious room. My heart was pounding aggressively against my ribs, but my exterior was solid ice. I looked directly at Eleanor. Nothing happened. There was not a single flash of recognition in her cold eyes. She just saw a uniform serving her. I looked at Julian. He gave me a highly dismissive, arrogant nod, already turning his attention back to his champagne. I finally looked at my father. Thomas squinted at me for a fraction of a second. A tiny, confused furrow appeared between his graying eyebrows, suggesting that something about my jawline or the cadence of my voice seemed vaguely familiar to him. But then, Eleanor sharply snapped her fingers to get my attention, and my father immediately looked down at his shoes, abandoning the thought. The moment passed completely. They truly only saw the uniform. They only saw the hired help. "Captain," Eleanor said, using a condescending tone usually reserved for unruly toddlers. "I trust you have thoroughly reviewed our highly specific itinerary. We expect a completely smooth, flawless voyage today. Mr. Sterling here is a very important, powerful man in the global shipping industry. We absolutely cannot have any amateur mistakes or delays." "I assure you, ma'am," I replied smoothly, looking right through her designer sunglasses. "I have been on the water my entire life. I know this vessel inside and out. We will provide an experience you will never forget." Harrison Sterling stepped forward and extended his right hand. I shook it firmly. He had a strong, honest working man's grip that betrayed his blue-collar beginnings. "Nice to meet you, Captain." I always respect a dedicated maritime professional. My own company relies heavily on men who know how to truly command a ship. "Let us not bore everyone with tedious business talk right now, Harrison," Eleanor interrupted loudly, waving her hand in the air. "We are here to relax and enjoy the extreme luxury I have provided for us. Captain, you are dismissed from the salon. Please get us underway immediately." I gave a sharp, professional nod and returned up the glass staircase to the bridge. As I fired up the massive twin diesel engines and expertly navigated the enormous superyacht out of the tight, crowded harbor, I felt an incredibly strange mix of deep, agonizing hurt and supreme, undeniable power. It violently stung my soul that my own father could look right at my face and not recognize his own flesh and blood. But the intense validation that they were currently sitting on my expensive furniture, drinking my premium champagne, and openly praising my corporate success was highly intoxicating. About 2 hours into the smooth voyage, we hit the open ocean. The coastline faded into a thin green line on the horizon. This was exactly when Captain Vance, the compromised man Mercer had bribed with a massive payoff, was supposed to trigger his vicious sabotage plot. Even though I had legally grounded Vance and revoked his credentials, I knew from reviewing the encrypted server logs that he had already tampered with the software controlling the massive gyroscopic stabilizers before I caught him. I had intentionally left his malicious sabotage code in the system. I wanted Eleanor to briefly experience the sheer panic of losing control. I wanted Julian to look like a complete, incompetent fool in front of his billionaire future father-in-law. And I wanted to prove to Harrison Sterling exactly who was in charge of this situation. Right on cue, as we hit a patch of naturally choppy, unpredictable water caused by an offshore current, the tampered software kicked in. The massive gyroscopic stabilizers, which normally kept the yacht perfectly flat and smooth against the waves, suddenly shut down entirely. The Sapphire Horizon immediately caught a heavy, aggressive crosswave. The entire 150-foot vessel lurched violently to the port side. Through the internal security cameras, I saw absolute, unadulterated chaos erupt in the main salon. A heavy crystal vase slid right off a polished table and shattered into 100 jagged pieces on the Italian marble floor. Eleanor let out a piercing, terrified scream, completely losing her balance and spilling her expensive red wine all over her pristine white linen suit. Julian frantically grabbed onto a structural pillar, his face turning completely pale as the massive boat rolled heavily to the starboard side. "What is happening?" Eleanor shrieked. looking wildly around the luxurious room, her voice bordering on hysteria. "Julian, do something. Go tell the captain to fix this immediately." Julian, the supposed lifelong yachting expert and maritime heir, froze completely solid. He had absolutely no idea what to do. He just clung desperately to the wooden pillar, looking exactly like a terrified, helpless child. He did not offer to help Vivienne. He did not move to assist his mother. He just braced himself and whimpered. Harrison Sterling, however, kept his balance perfectly by widening his stance. He looked straight up toward the bridge, waiting calmly to see exactly how the crew would respond to a mechanical failure in open water. I did not panic. I did not even flinch. I had anticipated this exact moment for 4 straight days. I stood confidently at the helm, quickly accessed the deep override terminal on the main console, and bypassed Vance's malicious code using my top-tier administrator privileges. I manually rebooted the heavy stabilizers and simultaneously adjusted our heading to cut directly into the oncoming waves, rather than taking them aggressively on the side. Within 45 seconds, the heavy, nauseating rolling completely stopped. The sapphire horizon leveled out beautifully, gliding smoothly through the water once again like a knife through soft butter. I picked up the intercom microphone. "Apologies for the sudden turbulence, folks. We experienced a minor software glitch in the automated stabilizer relay system. I have manually overridden the system and corrected our heading. It will be smooth sailing from here on out. Please let the crew know if you need fresh beverages or assistance with the broken glass." Down in the salon, Harrison Sterling was nodding in deep, genuine appreciation. "That was incredibly fast and highly professional," I heard him say over the audio feed. "A lesser captain would have completely panicked and tried to slow down, making the role much worse. Your captain knows exactly what he is doing, Eleanor. You hired a very competent crew." Eleanor, frantically trying to dab the massive red wine stain out of her ruined designer suit with a cloth napkin, just scowled deeply. "Well, for the exorbitant price I paid for this private charter, he better know what he is doing. Honestly, the maintenance on these rental boats is always so terribly subpar. I will absolutely be demanding a partial refund when we return." I smiled a cold, hard, victorious smile up on the bridge. The trap was fully set. The bait had been taken completely. It was almost time to spring the lock and watch the cage drop. By 1 in the afternoon, the coastal weather was absolutely perfect. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless, piercing blue, and the ocean breeze was warm and highly inviting. I expertly navigated the sapphire horizon into a highly secluded, breathtaking cove surrounded by dramatic, towering granite cliffs. It was a hidden gem on the jagged coast, accessible only to those with deep, generational local knowledge of the treacherous underwater reef structures. I dropped the heavy anchor, securing the massive yacht perfectly in the crystal-clear turquoise water. Luca and the highly trained crew quickly transformed the spacious aft deck into a 5-star open-air dining experience. They set up a massive mahogany dining table with crisp white linens, heavy silver cutlery, and stunning, vibrant floral centerpieces. Luca served an incredible, mouth-watering Mediterranean seafood spread featuring fresh local lobster, perfectly seared sea bass, and premium vintage Chablis wine sourced from my private collection. I stayed up on the isolated bridge, watching them eat through the high-def cameras, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to strike. The conversation down on the sun-drenched deck was flowing freely. Eleanor was aggressively dominating the discussion, actively trying to impress Harrison Sterling with fabricated stories of her supposed generational wealth, her high society connections, and her endless philanthropic efforts. Julian was sitting closely next to Vivienne, nodding along enthusiastically and occasionally throwing in a completely fabricated story about his time managing offshore real estate investments and complex corporate portfolios. Then, exactly as I had hoped and predicted, Harrison Sterling shifted the conversation to family dynamics. "Julian," Harrison said, taking a slow sip of his chilled wine. "Vivienne mentioned in passing that you have a stepbrother. Liam, I believe his name was. It is a terrible shame he could not join us for this beautiful family celebration today. I always firmly believe that family is the most important asset a man can have. Blood is thicker than water, as they say." The entire dining table tensed up immediately. The cheerful atmosphere evaporated. My father instantly looked down at his expensive plate, refusing to make eye contact with anyone, his shoulders slumping in deep shame. Eleanor let out a loud, highly condescending sigh, waving her hand dismissively in the air as if she was swatting away an annoying insect. "Oh, Harrison, you are far too kind and generous. But believe me, it is absolutely for the best that Liam is not here today. He is a bit of a troubled, lost soul. He never quite adapted to our elevated standard of living after I generously married Thomas and took him in." "Troubled how?" Vivienne asked innocently, placing her fork down on the table. Julian jumped right in, eager to solidify his disgusting lie and protect his false image. "He just completely lacks ambition, Vivienne. My mother and I tried to help him for years. We really did. We offered to pay for better schooling. We tried to get him a decent job, but he just wanted to mess around on the dirty docks with the local trash. He runs a little pathetic boat rental kiosk on a public beach now. Rents out dirty kayaks and cheap jet skis to annoying tourists for minimum wage. He has some serious, terrifying gambling debts, too. We just could not risk bringing that kind of unpredictable, toxic energy around your wonderful family. We have a strict duty to protect our reputation. Harrison frowned deeply, clearly disturbed by the harsh assessment. That is highly unfortunate, but still, family is family. You should not completely abandon him to his vices. We have not abandoned him, Harrison, Eleanor lied smoothly, taking a delicate bite of lobster. We simply had to set firm boundaries for our own mental health. Besides, can you even imagine someone like Liam on a magnificent, elegant vessel like this? He would probably be down in the hot engine room bothering the working crew, asking them how much money they make. He has absolutely zero class or refinement. He would have ruined this entire elegant experience for all of us. I stood up slowly from the leather captain's chair. My blood was roaring in my ears like a freight train, but my mind was sharper than a surgical razor blade. I took off my crisp white captain's hat and placed it neatly on the main console. I reached up and pulled off the dark polarized aviator sunglasses, tossing them aside. I unbuttoned the top button of my uniform, taking a deep, cleansing breath. It was time. I walked slowly down the spiral glass staircase, my heavy footsteps completely silent on the thick, luxurious carpets. I stepped out through the sliding glass doors onto the bright aft deck. The bright afternoon sunlight hit my face, illuminating my features clearly for the first time all day. I walked directly up to the head of the long dining table, standing tall and unwavering. I truly hope the seared sea bass is cooked to your exact specifications, I said, using my normal, natural, everyday speaking voice. I personally selected this hidden cove for our lunch today. It is one of my favorite, most peaceful spots on the entire coast. My father looked up first. He had a heavy silver fork full of fish halfway to his mouth. His eyes went incredibly wide, expanding in absolute, paralyzing shock. The heavy silver fork slipped right from his trembling fingers and clattered loudly onto his expensive porcelain plate. Liam, he whispered, his voice cracking violently. All the color rapidly drained from his weathered face. Eleanor whipped her head around so fast I genuinely thought she might snap her neck. Her perfectly composed, arrogant high society facade completely shattered in a fraction of a second. The crystal wine glass in her hand tilted dangerously, and more expensive wine sloshed right over the rim, heavily staining the pristine white tablecloth. Her mouth opened wide, but absolutely no sound came out. She looked exactly like she had just seen a terrifying ghost rise from the ocean. Julian's reaction was by far the most pathetic and deeply satisfying. He physically recoiled in his teakwood chair, his eyes darting wildly around the open deck as if he was desperately looking for a hidden escape route. His face turned a sickly, nauseating shade of pale gray. He looked like he was about to be physically sick. What the hell are you doing here? Julian stammered, his voice cracking and pitching high like a terrified teenager caught in a lie. How did you get on this private boat? I smiled. It was a calm, chilling, entirely victorious smile. I am the captain, Julian. I have been driving you around all morning. I am highly surprised you did not notice me standing right in front of you. But then again, you never really look at people you consider beneath you, do you? Harrison Sterling looked back and forth rapidly between me, Julian, and Eleanor. Complete and utter confusion etched deeply on his face. I am sorry. What exactly is going on here? Julian, do you know the captain of this vessel? He is not the captain. Eleanor suddenly shrieked, pointing a shaking, manicured finger at me, completely losing all of her carefully crafted aristocratic poise. Harrison, this is a terrible mistake. This is Liam. He is my husband's estranged, deranged son, the one who works at the public marina. He must have snuck aboard, disguised as the crew to cause a scene and extort us for money. Call the harbor police immediately. Actually, Eleanor, I corrected her gently, keeping my voice completely level, calm, and highly professional. I am indeed the fully licensed master captain of this vessel today. But more importantly, I am the sole owner of this yacht, and I am the founder, president, and CEO of Bennett Coastal Charters, the luxury charter corporation you are currently enjoying. The silence that instantly fell over the aft deck was absolute, heavy, and completely suffocating. Even the seagulls circling overhead seemed to pause their crying. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the water against the hull. That is completely impossible. Eleanor gasped, clutching her diamond necklace tightly, her breathing becoming incredibly shallow and erratic. This is a multi-million-dollar corporate superyacht. You clean boats. You rent out kayaks. You are a maintenance worker. No, Eleanor, I said, leaning forward slightly, resting my hands firmly on the back of an empty dining chair. I own 15 of these vessels outright. This specific yacht, the Sapphire Horizon, is my corporate flagship. It was featured prominently on the cover of Forbes magazine last quarter. You would know that if you ever bothered to ask me a single question about my life or my career for the past 10 years. You booked your highly exclusive, Incredibly expensive family cruise through a concierge service that contracted my company, the exact same company you deemed not successful enough to be invited to. I turned my attention directly to Harrison Sterling. The billionaire was sitting back in his chair, his sharp, analytical eyes processing every single word I said, rapidly putting the pieces of the puzzle together. "Mr. Sterling," I said respectfully, meeting his gaze. "My name is Liam Bennett. I am a self-made entrepreneur. I built this massive maritime corporation from a single broken-down speedboat when I was 20 years old. I have zero gambling debts. I have a flawless corporate record, a massive real estate portfolio, and I hold absolutely zero inherited wealth. Every single thing Julian and Eleanor just told you about me, and about their own supposed shipping empire, is a complete, malicious, fabricated lie." Vivian gasped loudly, covering her mouth with her hand, turning to look at Julian with absolute, unmasked horror. "Julian, is this true? You lied to my father about your family business? You lied about your own brother?" Julian was sweating profusely now. Drops of sweat rolled down his forehead. He tugged desperately at his expensive polo collar. I calmly reached into the inside breast pocket of my captain's uniform and pulled out the thick yellow manila folder containing the corporate booking contract. I tossed it effortlessly onto the center of the dining table. It landed with a heavy, deeply satisfying thud right next to the floral centerpiece. "That is the legally binding charter contract," I said loudly, my voice ringing clearly across the open deck, "signed by Sterling Global Logistics LLC, paid directly to the corporate accounts of Bennett Coastal Charters. My signature is right there on the bottom line as the CEO. You are sitting on my personal property. You are eating the premium food my chef prepared. You are drinking the expensive vintage wine I paid for. I did not inherit a single dime from my father because Eleanor made sure of that with her lawyers. I built this entire empire with the sweat of my own back while Julian was out crashing expensive sports cars and living off a massive monthly allowance." I looked directly at my father. He was openly weeping. Heavy tears were streaming down his weathered, tired face. He was completely unable to look me in the eye. He looked utterly destroyed by the weight of his own terrible choices. "I do not expect a single apology from any of you," I said, my voice hardening into cold, unbreakable steel. "This is not about making you feel bad. You are entirely incapable of feeling genuine guilt or remorse. This is about standing up for myself after 20 years of being treated like absolute garbage in my own home. It is about refusing to hide my incredible success just because it makes you feel insecure about your own pathetic, empty, fabricated lives." Harrison looked down at Julian, who was practically shrinking into his expensive teakwood chair, looking like a cornered rat. "You looked me dead in the eye in my own corporate boardroom," Harrison said, his voice dangerously low and dangerously calm. "You told me your mother's family pioneered coastal shipping in New England. You told me you personally owned a massive portfolio of commercial real estate. You told me your stepbrother was a gambling addict who refused to work an honest job. You built an entire relationship with my daughter on a foundation of absolute, shameless, calculated fraud." "Harrison, please. I swear I can explain everything," Julian begged, his voice cracking horribly, tears of sheer panic welling up in his eyes. "I just wanted to impress you. I wanted to be worthy of Vivian. I just exaggerated a few details." Vivian stood up next to her father. Her face was pale, but her eyes were filled with fierce, righteous anger. She reached into her designer purse, pulled out the massive 3-carat diamond engagement ring Julian had given her a ring. I now knew for a fact Eleanor had likely paid for by secretly liquidating her own dwindling assets, and slammed it down hard onto the dining table. It bounced off a wine glass with a sharp, echoing clink. "You are not worthy of anyone, Julian," Vivian said, her voice shaking with absolute disgust. "You are a pathetic, deeply insecure liar, and your mother is a toxic, cruel enabler. The wedding is completely cancelled. My father's lawyers will handle the vendors. Do not ever attempt to contact me again. Delete my number." Eleanor jumped out of her chair, her face flushed dark red with desperation and panic. The social empire she had meticulously built and fiercely guarded over 2 decades was collapsing in real time right before her eyes. "Harrison, Vivian, please let us not be hasty. Do not let this ruin everything. This is just a massive misunderstanding. Liam is extremely manipulative. He set this whole entire thing up just to ruin us because he is jealous. He is a sociopath." Harrison Sterling turned his piercing, unyielding gaze to Eleanor. "Eleanor, I run extensive background checks on every single person who does business with my corporation. I clearly should have run a much deeper, more thorough one on your son. However, I have seen exactly enough today to know exactly who the manipulators are in this family. You actively tried to humiliate a highly successful CEO just to protect your lazy son's fragile ego. It is utterly repulsive behavior. You sicken me." Harrison turned to me. The intense anger in his eyes faded slightly, replaced by deep, genuine professional respect. "Captain Bennett, I sincerely apologize that my family was unwittingly dragged into your stepmother's toxic charade. Your yacht is truly magnificent. Your handling of that mechanical stabilizer issue earlier was flawless. You are a man of extreme competence, high integrity, and incredible patience. I would like to request that you immediately pull the anchor, turn this vessel around, and take us back to the marina. I refuse to spend another minute breathing the same air as these frauds. Understood, Mr. Sterling, I said with a sharp, professional nod. We will pull anchor immediately and be back at the docks in exactly 45 minutes. As Harrison and Vivian walked away to wait in the comfortable forward lounge, leaving the three of them entirely alone at the ruined dining table, my father finally found his voice. He stood up slowly, his legs shaking violently. He looked 20 years older than he had that morning. The expensive suit Eleanor had bought him looked like a cheap, oversized costume hanging off his defeated, broken frame. Liam. Thomas choked out, tears openly streaming down his wrinkled cheeks. Liam, my son, my boy, I am so deeply, incredibly sorry. I failed you. I failed you for 20 long years. I watched them treat you like dirt, and I was too much of a coward to step in and stop it. I was so afraid of being alone again that I sold my soul to this terrible woman. I traded my relationship with my own son for a comfortable bed and a quiet life. Please, Liam, please forgive me. I looked at the broken man who used to be my absolute hero. The man who taught me how to tie knots. The man who used to smell like Old Spice and hard work. I felt a profound, heavy sadness in my chest. But I did not feel anger anymore. The anger had burned itself out. I forgive you, Dad. I said quietly, the ocean breeze catching my words. I forgive you, because carrying this intense anger for 20 years has been exhausting, and I refuse to carry it for one more day. But forgiveness does not mean access. Forgiveness does not mean we just go back to normal and pretend none of this happened. I did not wait for a single response from any of them. I turned my back on them, walked purposefully up the glass staircase, and returned to the bridge to take my ship home. 6 months have passed since that explosive, life-altering afternoon in the hidden cove. And in those 6 months, the dust has finally settled, leaving a completely different landscape in its wake. The universe has an incredibly funny way of balancing the scales when you finally decide to stand up for yourself. The fallout for Julian and Eleanor was swift, brutal, and entirely deserved. After Vivian publicly canceled the lavish wedding, the Sterling family made sure that Atlanta high society knew exactly why. They did not hold back. Julian became a complete social pariah overnight. He could not show his face at the country club without people whispering, pointing, and turning their backs on him. Without the impending marriage to a billionaire heiress to secure massive bank loans, Eleanor's massive credit card debts finally caught up with her. The facade crumbled. I heard through the local grapevine that the bank aggressively repossessed the cherry red Aston Martin, and Julian was forced to move out of the mansion and into a tiny, cramped apartment on the bad side of town. He is now working a miserable entry-level sales job just to pay his basic utilities. As for my father, the profound shock of that day on the yacht finally broke the powerful spell Eleanor had over him. 2 weeks after the disastrous cruise, Thomas formally packed his bags and filed for a messy divorce. It was a bitter legal battle over assets and real estate, but he walked away from her toxic mansion with his dignity finally intact. He moved into a modest, quiet townhouse, much closer to the marina. We are slowly, very cautiously rebuilding our relationship. We meet for coffee at a local diner once a week. He doesn't ask me for a single dime of my salary. He doesn't ask for favors, and he doesn't try to make excuses for his past cowardice. It will take years of consistent therapy and consistent action to fully heal the massive wound he left in my life, but for the first time in 20 years, he is acting like a father again. On the business front, the karma was incredibly sweet and highly lucrative. Harrison Sterling was so profoundly impressed by my quiet professionalism, my unshakable integrity, and the way I handled the extreme pressure on the Sapphire horizon that he reached out to my corporate office. A month later, Sterling Global Logistics signed a massive, multi-year exclusive B2B contract with Bennett Coastal Charters for all their corporate retreats, client entertainment, and executive transport needs. That single contract allowed me to expand my fleet by 3 more superyachts and completely dominate the East Coast luxury market. I even bought out Mercer Yachting after my corporate lawyers quietly presented Mercer with the irrefutable digital evidence of his corporate espionage and his illegal bribery of Captain Vance. He was terrified of a massive public lawsuit and a criminal investigation that would put him in federal prison. He completely folded. He sold me his entire struggling fleet for pennies on the dollar and quietly retired in absolute disgrace, moving out of the state. Standing on the sun deck of the Sapphire horizon today, watching the sun set over the vast, endless ocean, I feel a profound sense of absolute peace. For the longest time, I was running on nothing but pure spite and unresolved childhood trauma. I was building my entire corporate empire just to prove to a group of toxic, broken people that I was worthy of their love. I thought that if I just made enough money, if I just achieved enough status, Eleanor would finally respect me and my dad would finally protect me. But I learned the hardest lesson of all. You absolutely cannot buy respect from people who have no integrity to begin with. Family is not just about blood. Family is not about who is listed on your birth certificate or who you are forced to sit next to at a tense Thanksgiving dinner. Family is deeply rooted in mutual respect, unwavering loyalty, and unconditional support. I found my true family in Chloe, who stood firmly by me when I was sleeping on a freezing fiberglass floor. I found family in Luca and Diego, who helped me execute the most stressful charter of my life without asking a single question. I found family in the incredible life I built for myself with my own two bare hands. If you are out there reading this and you are currently dealing with toxic family members who constantly belittle your achievements, who actively try to tear down your success, or who make you feel like you are somehow hard to love, please listen to me. Do not shrink yourself to fit into their tiny bitter world. Do not let them dim your light just because it hurts their eyes. You have every right to protect your peace, to draw hard boundaries, and to walk away from anyone who refuses to celebrate your absolute greatness. The best revenge is not a screaming match in a driveway. The best revenge is massive, undeniable, unapologetic success lived entirely on your own terms. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out and allows us to bring you even more awesome stories. Thank you so much for watching.